Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're totally decoding the blueprint of power. We're diving deep into how power actually shifts within a society. We'll move from abstract sociological theory to a genuinely fascinating real-world case study. Because whether you realize it or not, the invisible forces of political mobility shape exactly who gets to make the rules in your community, your country, and honestly, the whole world. So let's figure out how this engine of change actually works. Here is our roadmap for today. First, defining political mobility. Second, the drivers of social change. Third, mobility in capitalist societies. Fourth, India's political evolution. And finally, the rise of marginalized voices. Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, defining political mobility. So, have you ever really wondered how individuals, or even entire massive groups of people, manage to climb the ladder of power within a society? What's kind of wild is that the word mobility itself was originally used in a strictly military context, meaning the organization and movement of troops for war. But today, sociologists use it to describe an entirely different kind of movement, the mobilization of people within a social hierarchy. And that brings us to our core concept, which is political mobility. Simply put, it's the movement of people from one social or occupational position to another, which basically, scratch that. It fundamentally alters the structure of political power. It's not just about, getting a fancy new job title. It's about changing the socio-political organization, the institutions, and the very structure of who holds real influence. Now, a really crucial point here is the difference between an open and a closed society. Think of it like two totally different rulebooks. In an open society, you've got equal opportunity. Your status is achieved through competition, completely regardless of your race, religion, or family lineage. Democratic systems thrive on this. They mobilize youth and marginalized groups. But on the flip side, a closed society, like a super rigid traditional agricultural system or a military dictatorship, well, in those, your position is conditioned entirely by birth or force. Power is monopolized, and dissent, it's usually crushed with an iron hand. We also see different directions of movement when people shift roles. For instance, if a teacher decides to become a physician, that's horizontal mobility. They change professions, sure, but their overall prestige, wealth, and social class essentially stay the same. Vertical mobility, though, that is the real game changer. That's an upward or downward movement that results in a definitive, noticeable change of your actual social class. Moving right along to Section 2, drivers of social change. So, what actually fuels this massive societal shift? Well, there are four primary engines that accelerate political mobility. First up, technological advancements. For example, the whole boom of computer technology created entirely new frontiers of massive wealth and new institutional structures in the West. Second is social conflict, which usually stems from structural inequality. Third is the expansion of modern industry, which is huge because it judges people on their intrinsic worth and skills rather than their birth caste. And fourth is urbanization, that massive migration of populations moving for employment to rapidly expanding cities like Bombay, Calcutta, and Kanpur, completely disrupting traditional occupational roles. What's truly fascinating here is how social conflict acts as a powerful catalyst for leadership change. Society inherently tries to accommodate demands for reform, but when tension boils over, it sparks major social movements. Just look at the 1969 separate Telangana agitation in Andhra Pradesh, or the All Assam Students' Union movements. They leveraged intense protests to literally launch students and youth right into the ruling political class. Okay, let's jump to Section 3, mobility in capitalist societies. Sociologists generally agree that social mobility is significantly higher in industrial societies compared to pre-industrial ones. The sociologist Talcott Parsons really hit the nail on the head here. As he noted, in capitalist systems, achievement and merit steadily replace ascribed characteristics. Basically, who your parents are, your race, or your lineage, those things begin to have way less influence. Instead, talent, ability, ambition, and just plain hard work become the built-in values for social selection. And this meritocracy creates two distinct paths of social mobility. You've got intra-generational mobility, which happens within a single lifetime, like, say, a person starting as an unskilled manual worker and then 15 years later earning a promotion to a junior assistant. Intergenerational mobility, on the other hand, measures shifts between generations. This is your classic scenario where an unskilled worker's son rises through education and sheer effort to become an accountant. All right, Section 4, India's political evolution. Let's see how this all plays out in the real world. If we trace India's timeline, we see a totally dramatic shift. Back in the 19th century, British colonial rule introduced English education. This created a Western-educated political elite that pretty much dominated the Indian national movement, and even post-independence politics right through the early 1960s. But then, look at the post-1960s shift. The introduction of local bodies, known as the Panchayat Raj, triggered a massive transformation that ultimately empowered rural grassroots leaders. It's like the whole center of gravity shifted. And this brilliantly illustrates the analysis by sociologist A.R. Desai. He pointed out that the pre-independence political elites were drawn heavily from traditionally dominant upper castes, particularly Brahmins. Because they had early access to that British English education, they were the ones who became the lawyers, the doctors, and the civil servants. They were highly westernized, heavily influenced by liberal ideas like the rule of law, and they effectively became the first generation of political elites. However, researchers Francine Frankel and M.S.A. Rao observed a massive disruption to this status quo after independence. While the 1950s looked a lot like the pre-independence era, the introduction of those Panchayat Raj institutions mobilized rural peasant castes. This created a stark, undeniable contrast. Power suddenly shifted from urban, English-educated upper castes to intermediate peasant castes who were non-English educated and deeply rooted in agriculture. Frankel and Rao famously describe this as the rise of backward class leadership, which is a term referring to historically disadvantaged castes finally asserting their political rights. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the rise of marginalized voices. 33%. That is a massive number. That's the reservation policy implemented in employment and education for women. And this policy has just thrown open wide opportunities, making women a highly significant and deeply mobilized force in both the political and social spheres. Just as industrialization initially shifted women's roles by opening up access to education, modern legislative measures have really accelerated this vertical mobility. For instance, women's reservations in the Panchayat Raj in Andhra Pradesh have been a monumental step, pulling them directly into local government decision-making. Similarly, reservations for backward castes in these exact same local bodies have thrown up incredibly strong grassroots leadership, effectively displacing the earlier, traditionally dominant caste groups. At the exact same time, we absolutely have to look at the powerful trajectory of Dalit political mobilization. Now, this wasn't an overnight thing. It actually originated way back in the 19th century with movements led by Jyotirao Phule, and it was advanced significantly when B.R. Ambedkar secured reservation policies for scheduled castes and tribes. By the 1990s, all this long-term mobilization culminated in organizations like the Bahujan Samaj Party, capturing major electoral success in Uttar Pradesh. And we saw similar movements gaining decisive political power across Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh. So we've seen how technological revolutions, deep social conflict, and targeted legislation can literally dismantle even the most rigid ancient hierarchies. It proves for sure that the structure of power is never permanent. But looking at all these drivers of mobility leaves us with a critical question to consider about our own modern systems today. When you look around at the leaders in your society, is their power truly achieved through merit and open competition? Or, deep down, is it still largely inherited? Keep that in mind as you navigate the structures of power in your own life. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.